our panel for this next session, Women Leaders, Perspective from Women Leaders in Women's Health. And so I invite back up our Dr. Clayton to the stage, as well as Dr. Michelle Berry and Dr. Eleanor Mwadenobi for this particular session. As they come up, Dr. Janine Clayton, as you know, is the National Institutes of Health Associate Director for Research on Women's Health and the Director for the NIH Office of Research on Women's Health. As we heard during this previous session, this last session, during her tenure at NIH, Dr. Clayton was the architect of the NIH policy requiring scientists to consider sex as a biological variable across the research spectrum. She also leads NIH's efforts to advance women in science careers. Dr. Clayton was previously the Deputy Clinical Director of the National Eye Institute, a board-certified ophthalmologist. Dr. Clayton's research interests include autoimmune ocular diseases and the role of sex and gender in health and disease. She is the author of more than 120 scientific publications, journal articles, and book chapters, and has received several awards in recognition of her work in leadership, including the Senior Achievement Award from the Board of Trustees of the American Academy of Ophthalmology and the American Medical Association's Dr. Nathan Davis Award for Outstanding Government Service. Dr. Michelle Berry is a Drs. Ben and A. Jess Shenson Professor of Medicine and Tropical Diseases at Stanford University, where she directs the Center for Innovation and Global Health and serves as the Senior Associate Dean for Global Health. She has recently written on the exclusion of women in climate sciences from COP meetings. Yes, how to be inclusive of meetings and leadership roles, among many other topics. A leading advocate for women's leadership in medicine and global health, she founded international nonprofit Women Lift Health. Dr. Berry is an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine, Council on Foreign Relations, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She is also past president of the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. Dr. Eleanor Mwadenobi is the president of Medical Women's International Association. She is also special advisor to the Nigeria Safeguarding Resources and Support Hub and co-founder of the Every Woman Treaty, a coalition advocating for a global binding norm to end violence against women. An independent gender, health, women's rights, and women, peace, and security expert, her career has spanned working as an anesthetist in the UK with ECOWAS on child trafficking, the United Nations on girls' education, and as lead researcher on gender-based violence for the World Bank. Eleanor has presented numerous papers, authored several publications, and been honored with several awards. As you see, this panel that we have, they are trailblazers in women's health and in global health, and we are very excited to have them. I wanted to be able to read their accolades, but this is only the mountain peaks of their stories and their career journey. And during this session, they will be able to fill in some of those gaps between those mountain peaks and some of those valleys and how they got to where they are today. And so thank you very much for joining us. We are looking forward to the perspective that you're all sharing. And so we'll start off with Dr. Clayton, if you can tell us a bit about your journey in that introduction. Would you like to, if you want, you can come or is it? Okay.
So I'm really excited to be here to tell you a little bit about this picture. I started undergraduate at Johns Hopkins University. I'm a native Washingtonian. This was just a $9 train ride from DC when I started undergrad. I won't tell you the year, but you can figure it out from that data. And there were no such thing as cell phones then. I start there because I was very fortunate to be able to attend a university that opened my eyes to the value of research. Actually, Johns Hopkins is the nation's first research university. And that's where I did my first research. And I was bitten by the research bug of, if you use this scientific method and you follow these rules, you can get an answer at the end of the experiment. That was very appealing to me. I went on to Harvard Medical School for a short period of time, and it was short because I became pregnant with my daughter and had some complications of my pregnancy, and I transferred to Howard University College of Medicine, where I finished medical school. I did a residency in ophthalmology, And here's the data point that I want you to remember. And the data point that took me from being a researcher in autoimmune eye disease to leading a women's health research office. When I read a paper that said 2/3 of the world's blind and visually impaired were women, and that we didn't know why that was the case, that it was not only because women live longer than men, and I didn't see anybody really looking for the why. That's why I became interested in the effects of sex and gender on health and disease. And I was fortunate to be able to be Dr. Vivian Pinn, pictured on the slide, the first full-time director of ORWH, to be her special assistant. At that point, I didn't know what a special assistant was, but I learned that it's basically everything Dr. Pinn asked me to do, and it was perfectly fine. I learned so much from her, and she continues to be an inspiration and mentor and friend. So the fact that I have been so honored, privileged, and blessed to have been able to travel this path, even though there were peaks and valleys, even though I had to take a little detour here and there, I'm really excited to be able to share that you don't need to go the straight line. Most of our careers are not a straight line, even though some people think they are. And so sharing that background with you so we can all reach our full potential and go in whatever path, peaks, valleys, cross over whatever rapids that you need to get to reach your full potential.
Thank you so much. Next, we have our perspective from Dr. Berry. Yes, it's just the background.
Okay.
Oh, I think you have your own mic in your chair. It's on.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me. Up on the slide are the highlights, but I don't want to talk about the highlights. I thought it'd be more interesting to talk about the lowlights, because you can read this as you, I'll just go through some of the chronologic lowlights. I really started, I'm going to be older than you, I'm sorry, Vivian, very interested in medicine after the Vietnam War. I wanted to get through medical school and college very quickly. I went to a women's college, Bryn Mawr, went through college and medical school in 6 years because I wanted to get a skill set that I thought could make a difference in the world. And then I got to Yale, where I started my residency training and really felt very strongly about starting a refugee clinic, realizing that I knew absolutely nothing. Nothing is taught about refugee health at that time, and I'm not so much at this time either. So I actually went off to Walter Reed, being the only civilian in a group of 40 men to get a diploma of tropical diseases. Came back, realized that that really no one in medical school were being taught about how healthcare approaches around the world are maybe a little bit different. So I started an overseas residency program at that time. Went through training at Yale. My husband I met him at Yale. Realized we were at the same level. Here's one of my low points. When he got promoted, he actually got significant amount more money than I did when I got promoted. So we sort of had to adjust that. And I went about adjusting it, but realized when I got pregnant with my first child, there was no maternity leave at Yale. So, and because of the lack of pay transparency, the lack of maternity leave, a group of women, which we put together, wrote the first Bill of Rights for Yale University for for maternity leave, for pay transparency. And I spent my next 25 years or so at Yale until I got recruited to be the inaugural dean at Stanford in global health. Well, at Stanford, I would like to say it was not much better, going through a very traditional a traditional road. And I can just tell you, it doesn't, I'm a dean. You can see I've had the really privilege of being the leader of the American Society of Tropical Medicine, the Consortium of Universities of Global Health. And just last week, I got called up for being too political at Stanford. And so it really doesn't end. And one needs to have a strong voice. One needs to stand up. When it was clear that when I was in Nairobi, and I was at a meeting where there were absolutely no female deans of medicine on the podium. I spoke up. And I was lucky to have Francis Collins there, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and was actually able to start an NGO that will actually put 3,500, well, we got about over $30 million, very nicely from Gates and a little bit from NIH, to start this NGO that takes women through a journey, a one-year journey, to actually learn leadership skills. So we give them an executive coach, we give them a mentor, and we aim to put 3,500 women into CEO positions. So I think you need to find your voice. They're going to try to silence you along the way, but you can sometimes nevertheless persist. So thank you.
It's on.
Well, thank you so much to the organizers, and what a privilege to be on stage with these phenomenal women. I started my life born, not preferred, on account of a culture in the Igbo tribe to which I belong in Nigeria called son preference. It means that the son is preferred over the daughter. But I had wonderful parents. My mum in particular said to me, "You do not need anybody to validate you. The mold was broken when you were born." That gave me such confidence and courage in that particular cultural climb. And something happened that could have veered me off course. It was the Biafra War. It was a starvation civil war in the country. Suddenly, we became refugees. But we were able to overcome that particular mountain. And I persevered, and I was able to get to medical school. Only to discover that I was the first female doctor from my village. And in the custom, when it was time for me to get married, the same community that disregarded me as a female decided that they would up the bride price and ask my husband's family for more of the bride price in order to be able for my husband to marry me. My dad, against the grain of culture, refused the bride price, told his own community that his daughter was not for sale and that his daughter was priceless. Thank you. Time went on, and I was desperate to study in the field of anesthesia. And I, through my professor, wrote several letters wanting to get to do my specialist course in the UK. And one day, the letter came, but it had taken about 6 weeks to get to me. At that time, the date on the letter for me to start my residency coincided with when my second child would be, based on my expected date of delivery, probably about 4 weeks. Mum came to the rescue. She said, "You've been waiting for this opportunity. I'll come with you. I'll look after the baby. Now let's pray that it's not overdue." So the prayers started. And Danielle came just over 4 weeks before I was to start my residency. So a lot of expression of milk and a lot of mum taking on Danielle. And in the UK, anesthesia means that you're in theatre, you're in obs and gynae, epidurals, carrying the crash bleep, and in my particular case, also on the Kent Air Ambulance. But it also meant that sometimes as I bent over to intubate, oh, who designed those breast pads? They just didn't work. So I was having overflows on my theatre gown. But the power of sisterhood. I would have other women in the theatre come and throw a theatre gown over me until I could finish with the patient and go and change my milk-stained clothing. I then looked at getting into touching lives, and it happened when I couldn't cope with 2 young children. I returned to Nigeria for more family support and came across a harmful practice against widows. You can read up all about it, it'll take time. But women who lost their husbands, treated as chattel, passed on to the next surviving male, disinherited, etc. Then started my work for humanity, even more outside touching lives as a doctor and as an anesthetist. And I found out that where I was touching lives one at a time, I could touch whole communities, because with a whole village of other activists with me, in 6 years, we were able to change a state law concerning widows in Enugu State in Nigeria. 14 years of being in the trenches, we were able to have a national law. And currently, just like Honorable from the Parliament, wanting to touch lives globally, now looking at ending violence against women of all vulnerabilities and of all ages through the Every Woman Treaty. Thank you. And sorry, quick one. I wear my insignia of office with pride as I head the Medical Women's International Association, an association of female physicians. The association has been in existence now for 105 years, and there is a backstory to how come I'm the first Nigerian to assume the position of president in its over 100-year history. Thank you.
Thank you so much. As you can see, this panel, they are phenomenal women, as you put it, and that encourage other women in research, in leadership and business, and in policy and healthcare. And so we have this full spectrum. I do want to thank Dr. Berry. She was going to give a bit more of extended talk about some of the data, and we can make that available, but we really want to be able to hone in and do some Q&A. And so we are going to slide through, but I will have you do this last portion about the obstacles and problems, if you don't mind teeing this particular one up.
So then these two slides are slides that came, that evolved from several conferences of Women Lift Health. And really some of the problems in achieving gender parity in global health leadership. And really three buckets. One were challenges climbing the institutional ladder, and the second was tensions between career and family, and the third was health and safety issues. And if you think about challenges climbing the institutional ladder, one was gender bias and discrimination at work. Overt bias was really what you saw in research poor settings, where, you know, I work in Zimbabwe, and there were actually, when I was working there, absolutely no women surgeons in Zimbabwe, and my students formed a group, I Have a Dream, because there was so much overt bias about women becoming surgeons. In resource-rich settings, there's covert bias, or what we call implicit bias. I can spend time, but I want to get through this quickly. There's this whole concept of the glass cliff, which we all know about, but what some people may not think about is the glass ceiling, well, actually the glass cliff, where women are given positions of leadership, but given no resources. So they're pushed off the cliff. And then there's the imposter syndrome, which I think some of us may know about that in this room. The second bucket was tension between career and family responsibilities. And this has to do not only in the academy, that career building years, and I think we heard a little bit about this, overlap with reproductive years. In my academic setting, it's obviously the time when you get tenure, but we heard about work sessions that can obviously conflict with those times. And then as our growing, changing demographic, we've become the sandwich generation, where we're taking care not only of our children, but also of our parents. So that becomes a tension between career and family responsibilities. And then health and safety issues. I don't know how many of you in this room, I've had a colleague that's been raped in the field, but about 1 out of 4 people, I'm wearing my hat as global health, actually experience sexual assault in field work. So we heard a little bit earlier that I think by our host, that we don't want to hear just about the problems. So the next slide are some of the solutions that were brainstormed at the many conferences that we've had. For challenges climbing up the institutional ladder, it's really important to have mentorship, but not only mentorship. I don't know how many people know the difference between being a sponsor and a mentor. A sponsor is somebody who puts a woman forth, puts them the head of the committee, gives them that, the lady from Nature, gives them that editorial, which is, you know, a coveted position. It's not just telling them how to navigate, which is what a mentor does. We need leadership grants for women in LMIC, particularly resource-poor countries. I don't want to spend time talking about Women Lift, but I mentioned that coaching and executive mentorship and coaching is important. And I'm working on a project now because it's taken me a long time to realize this, and it wasn't something that was comfortable, is that we're not going to get anywhere without having male allies, and that we need to engage our male allies. And I really think most men want to be allies, but they don't necessarily have the toolkit to be the best ally. So we're working on actually putting together a toolkit to bring male allies into the conversation.
Dr. Barrett, actually, I wanted to pivot you a bit. So in this particular, we see these solutions, and you have, no, it's actually to follow up because, you know, I wanted you to maybe speak to what strategies have you employed throughout your career that addressed obstacle 1 that you might be able to share. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think I talked a little bit about that. I spent a lot of time trying to develop this NGO that actually can give leadership and mentorship and sponsorship for women. Our last meeting in Tanzania had 1,000 women from 40 countries. And it was an amazing event. And I'm working on engaging male allies. Again, trying to develop this toolkit and disseminate it. For maternity leaving and child rearing, I think we heard some very poignant stories about that. And then I was very lucky to push for on-site daycare at Yale, where I actually, in between patients, would run and breastfeed. I did have the leaking problem, but, and at Stanford, we just developed lactation rooms so that women can actually pump. So those are some of the work I've tried to do. Maybe Janine or?
Yes, Dr. Clayton, you know, how did you adjust your work and family activities to, you know, throughout your career? Because I know you mentioned some of those changes, and so what has worked for you that you're able to now do in your role in leadership for other women?
There were no lactation rooms in my medical school, and I didn't know that you're supposed to be aware that this might happen. So I spent a little time in the ladies' room in my first day of medical school. I didn't have any change of clothes either, so it was a little bit of a problem. So I was keenly aware that as a medical student with a child, and there were like 3 of us out of 150 that had children, and I think I was the only one with stroller children, so, you know, it was challenging, and so I thought that that was something I should carry forward as I move forward. So one of the things I was able to do in my new position was to create these, along with my colleagues, continuity supplements. These are funding programs that allow people that experience a qualifying life event, like childbirth, like adoption, like an ill family member, sandwich generation issues, to continue their research, but to step back from it. So it provides the funding to pull in somebody else to do the research, to do the analysis, so you don't have to stop your funding. That sounds pretty basic, but we didn't have that program before. Also was able to create a program called a reintegration supplement that addresses obstacle 3. If you're in an unsafe research environment, for a variety of reasons, you can use this funding to go to another research environment, even within the same institution. So we saw these rates of sexual harassment being increased, and we provided one pathway. And we also are now rewarding and awarding institutions who are doing a good job. So we're elevating those institutions and not just giving them an award. We created a toolkit online to share their lessons learned and to allow people to search for institutions that are similar to theirs. So we're disseminating their lessons learned.
Thank you. And we'll start with Dr. Wadenobi. You do a lot in this space as far as workplace safety. And so maybe can you talk a bit about what you've done to make sure that staff and patients alike are safe in their environments?
Absolutely. If I may, starting with looking at obstacle 1 and climbing the institutional ladder, it's about leaving the ladder leaning against the wall after you have climbed. What we find is that, a lot of us say that we're doing mentoring, but, just like my colleagues have said, the support has to be there. How have you, actively provided the rungs of the ladder for the young to climb? Here we are at UNGA, and the topic is the Summit of the Future and addressing young people. And in a panel yesterday, I said, the young people are the missing middle. Why? We're constantly saying the young are the future. They are not the future. They are the now and they are the present. For as long as we keep on referring to the young as the future, then they will be excluded. The real future are those yet unborn. Then looking at career and family, have a good family support system where it's possible. Remembering that there are those who do not have that support system, but your community, your circle of influence. Sometimes we feel that, we're being too much of a bother to the next person. I saw something in my devotional, and I've made that my mantra, that says, encouragement is like sunlight to a closed flower. So many of us in this room have different types of closed flower, in the sense that we might be going through stuff. And it might just take somebody who sits next to you to say, oh, that's a nice scarf. And it just brings sunlight. And that's the encouragement that is like sunlight to a closed flower. Lastly, to talk about obstacle 3 and health and safety issues, in my day job, I work on a program for the prevention of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment in the workplace. We have issues more broadly around violence, and specifically violence against women and girls. 1 in 3 women and girls, according to WHO, have suffered one type of violence or the other. That's an existential threat. That's of pandemic proportions. When COVID came, we called it a pandemic within the pandemic. UN Women called it a shadow pandemic. The Secretary General of the United Nations asked for a ceasefire behind the closed doors of our homesteads, because in the context of the lockdowns, there was increased violence. But let's also look at workplace inequalities, power and privilege that causes harassment, that causes bullying. So we work as the resource and support hub on ensuring that there are actionable, meaningful, workable, operationalizable codes of conduct and safeguarding policies that ensures that whether it's in our communication or in our actions, and a lot of us in this room have partners that we support, either in our daily work, in our humanitarian work, especially now that we have the confluence of what I call the 4 C's. We have the remnants and still resurgence of COVID. We have conflict. We have cyber violence. And I'm, trying to remember my 4th C, but it'll come to me. If somebody remembers, you can remind me. But, oh my goodness, the elephant in the room, climate crises. So there's a confluence of the 4. And we go out with our programming, and sometimes, with all the good intention in the world, might cause harm to those to whom we want to bring good. Whilst I still have the microphone, lastly, the last session on menopause. Has anybody thought of the impact of language on the issues we are dealing with? In the field of medicine, when a girl starts her period, it is called menarche. Menstruation. When it's painful, it is called what? When it is painful, what's painful? Bleeding every month. Dysmenorrhea. When it's trying to stop, menopause. And when any department in a woman's body needs assistance, we still go to the guys because we go to the gynecologist. Thank you.
Okay,
On
so
a lighter mode.
we thank you for that transition. We are going to do some rapid fire Q&A. So if the mics are coming around, we will take some from the audience. And then if there's online, we ask that questions be limited to 20, 30 seconds. Ask the question, and then I will direct for an answer to come through. So do we have any questions in the audience? I'll sit here.
Thank you so much. It is a wonderful session to actually participate and all the distinguished panelists. And we are really inspired to listen to your stories. So I think in the current era of technology, I think all the problems you actually shared here, and from the gender-based violence to the leadership or access to care, I think we need to use the responsible use of artificial intelligence to create access, promote, and empower the women globally, and last miles where there is a very much shortage of resources. Thank you.
We have one over here, and then in the yellow.
Thank you, Obed from the African Academy of Sciences. Very interesting conversations. And just speaking on what the last speaker said about the men in the picture. If I do not understand, the challenges that women are going through in my space, how do I support them? So I think we need to be included in that conversation so that then we can be a supportive structure or system altogether. Otherwise, people will not be talking about these issues because you think we don't want to support, but it's often because we are not enlightened enough to be able to support. Thank you.
And so I actually, teeing off of that, Dr. Clayton, what is the involvement that you find for male researchers and scientists on these women's health topics? Is it robust?
Most of the women's health researchers, about 70, 80%, are typically women. And it can be even higher than that. For our programs, 80, 90% are women. And also we know that women are more likely to report as first or senior authors disaggregated results by sex. So the workforce and what the workforce looks like does affect what is being studied. And importantly, the leadership reflects what we decide to do. I'm excited to share with you, of course, we have a second woman director of NIH, Dr. Monica Bertagnoli, and the largest number ever of women institute directors of those 27 institutes. So we are seeing different conversations. It does affect the conversation, who's in the room.
I will make one comment about that is still, and Janine, I apologize, it's still less women get funded by NIH, and even when they get funded, they get less money. And I know the diversity office is working on that.
Big issue. We need to continue to work on it. One of the nuances there is for a first R01 or RPG, men and women are funded at the same rate. For the first, women are less likely to come in for a second or another grant. And women may ask for less money than men do. So you have to look at the full picture. Again, of course, work we need to do in this space.
Thank you. And in the course of my work, the word empowerment has been bandied a lot. And I think we need to put the prefix of meaningful empowerment. So working with widows, for example, in trying to access loans, it has always been that there are micro loans, micro credit specific to women. So women now leave the banana that they're selling to access this tiny loan, and they spend several hours of the day either stringing beads or using the microcredit that they are given. And when you look at the statistics, they are excellent at paying back. However, the number of people hours that goes into struggling to pay back that microcredit, whereas if they're given a huge amount where they can come together in a cooperative or as a community or as an affinity group, it makes more sense to them, and that is what we are doing with the widows that we have. I will quote my dear friend Heather Ibrahim Leathers of the Global Fund for Widows. She says, please do not give the widows fish. She says, please do not even train them, just train them how to fish, but train them to own the entire lake of fish. That is true empowerment. Thank you.
Thank you. We had a question online. Is it?
No, no, sorry, this is just a comment. Sorry, I just want to pick up what Michelle Barry was talking about men. So Irene and I collaborated this year for this particular event. So I'm quite proud of the fact that as a man inside the ECH Alliance, I chose women's health to be one of our 4 global themes. And for me, it's really important that if we're going to see change fast, men have to be part of the solution. And I frankly cannot understand why men are not engaged, because I have a mother, I have a wife, most men have a daughter. Why the hell wouldn't we be interested in all of women's health? So for Michelle, reach out, talk to me, because I have a real interest in how we communicate with men. The one thing I would say is, you know, I'm 63, so most of my mates, if you like, are at an age when things are happening to them, and traditionally we never talked about that. And I cycle a lot, and we go cycling, and now we are talking about all sorts of things, from prostate cancer to prostate exams. And now I think 10 years ago, there's no way we would have talked about that. So I think a lot of it is to do with the fact that men don't easily talk about anything to do with health, let alone women's health. And that's one of the things that we do. So I'm actually optimistic that we can actually empower men to actually be part of the solution.
Thank you. Was there another question from the audience in the back? Oh, up here. Okay. We'll have the 2 quick questions and then 2 quick responses.
Yes, I'll make it quick. Thank you so much. It's been great. And, you know, I truly related to, you know, what you were saying. I was telling her that my dad also did reject my bride price and said my daughter is not for sale. So, so that was good. So my name is Ife. I'm from Nigeria. I do a lot of work in women's health. My company is called Health Tracker. And we leverage technology and innovation to drive improvement in women's health. So innovation, advocacy, and now we're doing a lot more work in research. So we've done things like self-sampling for cervical cancer, menstrual health hygiene using AI, generative AI on WhatsApp, and we do discrete STI testing, partnering with pharmacies to ensure that there's diagnostics before testing, and a lot more work like that, so I won't bore you. But my question is around, you know, research. I came here because of this, because I see a lot of issues around women's health on the continent, and I feel like we're not talking enough about it, but it's more from the point of view of not empowerment, but the ability to have power to make a difference. And from even research point of view, so Black women, for example, you know, are not included in a lot of the clinical trials, but Black women have the highest cases in uterine fibroids. How do we begin to get in front of that? How do we begin to get included in the research? How do we work with you phenomenal women and companies and research institutes so that we actually are including the data that we're seeing day to day in our society and community, and actually can provide meaningful data contributions to the value that we're creating to women across the world? That's my question.
I can mention the programs we have that are specifically focused on underserved and understudied populations, including racial and ethnic marginalized populations in the US. So I showed you that U3 Health Data Book where we show the data of the knowledge gaps. So then we created a program that will allow currently funded NIH investigators to have a supplement to address questions related to understudied populations. That's one of the ways we're trying to get in front of this. Michelle?
And just a quick thing is that you need to have your voice. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And you really need to stand up and volunteer to do things. You don't want to be on that menu.
And just behind you, we have another.
Hi, my name is Jenna Roy. I'm from Toronto at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. I run a women's mental health program, and I would love to hear from each of the panelists. You know, we live in a patriarchal society. We want men as our allies, and there are still days men, women don't see the bigger picture, where we are advocating to, people who are not listening or willing to open their ears. Is there a rebuttal that you've ever had in your career that has really, really helped to drive that mission forward, where, when you say it, people are paying attention, that we could also borrow when we are trying to fight this fight in Canada, globally, around the world?
I can definitely say that, one thing we're constantly using, and it's part of our theme, is that we are one humanity. And when people realize that despite our differences, what are the things that we need? We need our rights, we need our dignity, and we need our respect. So we are more alike than we are different, but it's about realizing first that we are one humanity. And that is, that's the theme for the Medical Women's International Association, one humanity, health solutions through our partnerships, which is why I'm known for saying we have to do it together. You know the proverb very well, that if you go alone, you can go fast, but when you go together, you can go far. And it is elbows locked. That's how, elbows locked, we form that formidable wall. Thank you.
Isn't she amazing? Oh, I get to follow that one. You asked for some practical things too. You saw that I led my talk with data. As a researcher, as a research organization, I typically lead with the data because it's irrefutable now that there's sex differences. Those data are irrefutable. The other thing is a strategy to understand who you're talking to and have multiple tools in your toolkit to deal with multiple perspectives. McKinsey had that recent report that talked about it's not just about the years of life lived. Women live longer than men. Why do we have a men's health office? It's the life in the years. Women spend more time with chronic disease, and we need to understand that to improve everyone's health. So making it relatable and relevant to the person that you're speaking to, understanding the person that you're speaking to, aligning with something that they want for their organization, that's negotiating 101, right? Find the win-win, and be okay with the no today if it will help with a yes tomorrow.
And I'll end on the one word, which is advocacy. Be an advocate. And again, find your voice and use it.
I don't really have anything else to add to that, so I won't. But I do know I wanted to, if you wanted to give a couple comments, because there's some resources domestically that I wanted to share, if you wanted to speak to any of these before we close, or we can send them out to folks. Okay, so there's just some opportunities that are not just domestic, is it? Some of them are domestic, some of them are available abroad. as far as women advancing in their careers, and then Women for Women's Health research, the opportunity map we talked about earlier, and then the online learning opportunities through the Office of Research on Women's Health. I was also a partaker of a lot of this work coming in up in research. I reckon it was never even a thing. You know, we didn't talk about it, and it wasn't so much that we did not, we were told not to do it. It was just never brought up. So it wasn't even in the mind frame to look at sex and gender differences in our work. And so we have to retrain our field. We have to retrain the researchers and the healthcare providers. And so I will just thank you so much. Thank you very much for this panel. Can we please give them a round of applause for all of their insights?